first grew curious about the paranormal. Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to Howls of Asher.
And I want to welcome everybody back. This is House of Asher. I'm your host, Steve Asher. We are listening to episode 52, and I'm pretty excited. I'm going to throw out some titles here. American Monsters, Monsters Among Us, The Beast of Bray Road, The Michigan Dogman. And I could go on for half this episode listing all these books of our following guests. I want to introduce everybody to Miss Linda Godfrey. Linda, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. It's really nice to be here.
Well, thank you so much. And, it's so funny that, sometimes people seem to come to things just by synchronicity. I hate saying happenstance because I don't really believe in that. I think we end up generally where we're supposed to be. Sometimes you go your whole life one direction to find out you're supposed to be right over here. And life tends to turn you back to whatever direction you're supposed to be in. And so what I'm kind of curious about right off the jump is that I know that you started out, working for a small Wisconsin newspaper as a reporter. Was that part of this whole thing? I mean, what drew you to things like Dogmen and cryptids? Was there an encounter? Was there just reports came to you, and so you began to kind of go out? Did you grow up kind of wanting to be Scully and Mulder, or did that just sort of develop as time went on?
Well, yeah, it never occurred to me. I had the idea from a very, very young age that I wanted to write someday. And I was obsessed with things like fairies and Bigfoot when I was young because I had a lot of fairy tale books, and then my dad subscribed to a lot of those men's magazines that had the Bigfoot in them, and Sports Afield, and they'd always have articles on Bigfoot and UFOs and things like that too. So I had some exposure to those things, but what I really wanted to do was be an artist. And I remember telling my 5th grade teacher that when I grew up I wanted to write books and illustrate them myself. And she looked at me with horror. She said, "Oh, I think you could do a lot better than that, Linda." And to my mind, that was it. I was going to be happy, and I'm just so grateful and thankful that I've sort of ended up this way accidentally. And the only reason that I was working at that newspaper was because I wanted to get some cartoons in print. I was working toward being either a comic strip artist or an editorial cartoonist. And I was coming pretty close. I was working with some heads of syndicates and just was getting frustrated and offered my services to the newspaper for free for editorial cartoonists. And it just happened to lead to one of the reporters quit, and I was there, and so they hired me to be a reporter. And the next thing I know, I'm hearing rumors in my own hometown about what people were calling a werewolf on this little country road outside of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin. And they were saying, "I saw this thing, I don't know what it was, but if there was such a thing as a werewolf, this would be it." And they were all describing something 5 to 7 feet tall, kind of hunched over, furry brown hair. It seemed to behave oddly. It would stare people in the eyes, crouched by the roadside holding roadkill on upturned palms, dash across the road in front of cars more than seemed to be necessary. And when I went and interviewed these people, they seemed like everyday, sane, normal people from all walks of life, men, women, blue collar, white collar, you name it. It was just a very diverse group. So I thought, well, I don't think this could possibly be a hoax. I think these people are on the level. It might be that there is some dangerous animal out there that people really need to be aware of. Maybe it is just folklore in the making. Maybe somebody saw something and it's been expanded on. But I thought, well, that's really another reason to write it, because how many times do you get to be right there at the formation of folklore and of widespread folk story? So I interviewed the people. We ran it in the newspaper, which had a pretty good circulation. It went to the entire county. And within 2 weeks, we had national media attention, and that was 1991. It was December 1991 and January 1992, that New Year's weekend. There was no internet to go viral. It had to be done just through the AP and newspapers, and that attracted not only all the local TV networks from Milwaukee and Madison, but we had Inside Edition and Sci-Fi New in Search Of, and people were writing me. That was the most amazing thing. I discovered immediately that it was not just some local little phenomenon, that people all over the United States had been seeing upright canine-like creatures, and we were just one of many. So that was the mind-blowing thing to me. I was getting letters from all over the U.S. and Canada. I remember it wasn't very long after that published before I got one from the Virgin Islands, saying I saw something like that here. I found out that Michigan had its own Dogman that had much the same scenario in 1987, but it just had never reached the national level. That this one, for some reason, just took off. And once the wolf was out of the bag, there's no getting it back in. It just kept going and going. And I worked at that newspaper for 10 years, and during that time, I was taking reports from people and just kind of keeping files in my own way and writing back to people, telling them what I knew. And I decided it was time to put it in a book where everybody could consult it and see exactly what happened and who said what and what went on. And that became The Beast of Bray Road, Tailing Wisconsin's Werewolf. That came out in 2003. So for a good 11 years or so, when I worked at the paper, I was just doing regular stories on local health things, politicians, fights between communities, all the things you've got in small
community
town.
Related, sure. Who's running for the new magistrate and whatnot.
Exactly. And every once in a while, I'd have a little pile up of things I thought the public should see, and so I'd write an update, just a column type of thing, maybe four or five at the very most during all that time. So it wasn't like I was, using that time to, really focus on the werewolf angle, and I didn't think they were werewolves then, and I don't now, by the way. But I was honing my investigatory knowledge, how to really look into things and investigate. My writing experience got better, so it was sort of a nice training ground before it really launched into the realm of what we have now in the way of online resources, where all of a sudden I think we had a Yahoo group. So those were before Facebook, and people became much easier to find. The reports started skyrocketing, and after I wrote the book, everybody started writing. I had so many reports, I had to immediately write a second book to get all of those in, and it just kept going from there.
So it almost seems just like a real brush fire. It's just like once you turned the key and opened the door, there was no putting it back in the box, as it were. And I was talking actually to the last episode I'd had, excuse me, Graham Phillips. He's a British writer, and they call him the British Indiana Jones. And we were kind of touching base on, because I have a tendency to romanticize the days of, hey, we got to run to the library, and looking like a Buffy Giles deal. Here, I need the book on blah blah blah. And he's like, oh no, that was horrible. He said it's so much easier now. He said I'm too old for all that. And it's how it is. You kind of get nostalgic about things. And but he said, yeah, it's so much easier now. You want to find out about a location, go Google Earth on it. There it is. You can kind of scout it out, get an idea of the terrain and the area, and what type of equipment and lighting you might need for setting up for different events and stuff. Well, the thing too is that what struck me is something that you do, and I actually try to do in my own writing, is that I'm not. It's not even so much I want to believe, because belief denotes a certain sort of
right.
dogmatic quality, dogmatic quality, if we can say.
No pun intended, right?
Thank you. But just going, look, I do believe there's too much smoke to not have something going on, and not everyone.
Exactly.
Through all these different communities, all these different regions around the world, having this archetype of a dog creature and different type of cryptids, did you find when you first come into this, and it's not as bad now, but at the advent, like you were talking about, In Search Of and things like that, when you would have like MUFON and things like that, and it's like, well, we saw these black triangular ships, or we had some sort of contact, or there was depressions, and then somebody says, yeah, I saw this 7 or 8 foot tall canine type creature, and they're going, oh god, this guy. Did you find then there was a little bit of that weird hierarchy of like, well, this is okay, but this is a little nutty?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's kind of always been that way, and it's kind of interesting that in the beginning, we had a pretty well entrenched set of Bigfoot investigators, and they didn't want to admit that there was another tall, furry creature. Anything that was reported, they would say was, well, it must have been a snouted Bigfoot, which, if you look at the anatomy of the two, between a canine standing up and a Bigfoot standing up, they're worlds apart. The skeletal differences, the muscular differences are huge, and there's some Bigfoot have been reported to have a prognathic jaw, which means it juts forward a little bit, but nothing like a muzzle with big fangs in it, and nothing like a canine muzzle. So right from the beginning, also, yeah, a lot of people who had been studying certain phenomena for years and years said, oh no, we know all the phenomena, there can't be another phenomenon. Well, strange phenomena happen as they happen, and just as we can't define them or catch them when they're here, how do we know when they're coming and going, or when a new one's going to pop up? It's all something beyond our ken, and it seems like there are areas where when one thing shows up, there are other phenomena. It's like, to me, I really feel after 26 years that there is some kind of a connection between upright furry creatures, UFOs, unknown sky phenomena, other types of creatures,
reptilians and all that. I mean,
yeah, all of the Mothman, all of those things.
Well, just being, a kid that grew up in the woods of western Kentucky and getting out and finding cave systems, because we have what's known as a karst system here, which is a lot of Swiss cheese limestone with a lot of aquifers. And, and they're discovering different sort of creatures in caves all the time. And there's something, it amazes me, what I call the human hubris. We've got this on lock. I think there's a safety in that ignorance, but I also think it's sort of a genetic dead end. If you won't go any further, because I've also found this to be true of scientists and researchers as well. Everybody wants to think that they've got it figured out and their theory is best, and that, like you were talking about, oh well, no, this has to be this type of thing because we've been talking about this type of thing for 20 years. Who are we to say what's coming and going, be it from below the earth, some certain sort of pan-dimensional, I don't want to use Stargate, but who knows? Who knows how these things travel and manifest? Maybe they've lived alongside mankind forever. There was a gentleman named Montague Summers, long time ago guy, a bishop, I believe, and I remember reading his books when I was small. I was a real quirky kid. I was the type of kid that would go to the library and ask him for that, and the rites of exorcism and all that. I was kind of like Pugsley Adams, but with a southern drawl. And so I understand how funny people are when you start shifting their paradigms a little bit. And but we're supposed to be open-minded. We're supposed to be I'm going to say high-minded, but researchers, you're supposed to be somewhat high-minded and open to possibilities. And like you said, once you start tying the ends up and saying, well, there's nothing else can come through this leader, you kind of kill the root of the tree. Well, let me ask you this too, and I know I'm kind of jumping from things, and I apologize. Now, when you said you started making contact with different folks, have you let me rephrase this. Have you had many, or have you had any contacts about what they call the Beast of LBL? Because there's an area called Land Between the Lakes, which is maybe 10 miles from me, here in western Kentucky. Yes,
I have. And of course, when you talk about Land of LBL in terms of wild beasts, immediately comes to mind. There was supposed to be this legendary massacre of a family of 4 that were camping, and one body was found stuck up in a tree, and just this horrendous thing. And supposedly, and supposedly the government covered it up so people wouldn't know about dogmen, although there was no proof that a dogman did it. I don't say that it didn't happen because I don't know, but I have never found any proof at all to show that it did. And in fact, I've gotten a couple of reports of the unknown upright wolf-type creature in the LBL forest, but they were both very benign. One, there was a large one that ran across the road in front of a man as he was driving out from his campsite, and he slowed up and stopped, which was good because right behind her there were 3 little ones, 3 pups on their hind legs, running after her. And I did what I always do. I tried to kind of scope out the details and verify anything that he tells me that could be verified. And this guy seemed really, I just had a good impression about him. He had a reputable sort of occupation. He wasn't trying to make it sensational in any way, and everything he told me checked out. I had another one where it was just more of a normal sighting, where he saw one step from behind a tree and look at him, but in no way did either of the persons feel like they were about to be massacred. So that older story, I don't know what it is or if it's true or not, but it differs a lot in character from the other ones I've received from that region. And I did talk about this a little bit when I was in Kentucky recently, in Frankfurt, for the CryptidCon, and I just kind of said basically what I've just told you here now, is that I just have never seen the evidence for it. And when I left, there were 2 police officers that were kind of standing behind a wall and motioned me over and wanted to say something to me, and they both said, thank you so much for not making a big sensational deal. We've never known of any possible shred ourselves, and we don't like to see people duped by it. They had no objection to the sightings that were more normal. They said, yeah, there's all kinds of things you can see, but to their knowledge, they had never known the slightest thing about such a massacre taking place, and they kind of were irked the way they felt that it had been sensationalized over the years.
Well, it seems too that and because growing up here, that's just one of those stories you hear, and I've heard from so many different people, and I do believe there probably had been some sort of animal attack, and I do believe that people have seen a dogman and also something that was more akin to a Bigfoot. But I think what happens is when you take an unrealistic jump in an attempt to go, oh well, these are definitely connected. Okay, well there's your validity. There's our physical evidence. I think you're doing a disservice and dishonoring the memory of those people who may or may not have actually passed. I've even heard that with people that have disappeared in LBL, because we have it. I don't want to make it sound crazier than it is, because I too don't like to oversell that. Because I want people to come visit this area. I want people to enjoy enjoy the lakes, because there's a lot of it here. But
beautiful. Well,
I mean, and there's just areas. If you are unfamiliar with rock climbing, please don't try to learn it there. If you're not a strong swimmer, please don't try to learn it in the lakes, it's not wise, and don't do it by yourself. But there are folks that I've talked to. I'll throw a name out, Kirk Stokes. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Mr. Stokes or not.
I don't know. Well,
he's a gentleman. He does research in this area as well, and really laid back, humble country guy. And he also goes into the thing of, look, I don't know. And even in the stuff, I was going to tell you, I don't mean to plug myself, but in my first book, The Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary, I had a story that they kind of described it. It was probably closer to what they would call a hellhound, and it was in the area known as Vinegar Hill, which is just right up from the penitentiary. And they said this thing had chased them up through hills and stuff, and they saw almost like a really large, almost like a dire wolf. Are you familiar with what a dire wolf is?
Oh yes.
So huge huge, I'm not trying to do my Trump impression, huge, big guy, and then it ended up just kind of fading out, which sounds more maybe mystical than it is physical. But to tie one thing together that you said as well, and I'm sorry I'm jumping around, you're like, well, they reported this, and then it ends up being this. I think it's the classical fish story where I guarantee there's been sightings. I guarantee that there's been attacks. But I think once you, like you said, you try to tie that all down under one pen, that's where the fantasy side of it comes out, and people want to believe that. I don't necessarily why they want to think that people are getting eaten by these things, because that would suck. Because I love those woods. We go through LBL quite often. It's one of the most scenic, peaceful places in this area to visit. And but have you had similar situations in your area and in other areas other than LBL, so not to get stuck in that, of similar attacks? Because it depends on who you talk to. Some people go, well, these things seem like they were watching us. They seem like there's an intelligence. And as I understand, you've had reports where they felt they were being communicated on sort of a telepathic level.
Right, quite a few. And, I haven't, in 26 years, the closest I've come to an injury report from anybody was a man who was hiking in Quebec. I didn't have a gun or anything with him. He was just, a nature lover, and came eye to eye with an upright wolf-like creature on the path. And they both stared at each other for a minute, and then it was obvious, he said they both wanted to get away. And he said in his nervousness, he thinks he actually almost kind of jumped into the path that the creature was going, and he ended up getting grazed on his hip and thigh. It had its muzzle open, and fangs were kind of bared as it hopped past him, and it sliced open this portion of his side. He had to go to the hospital and get stitches. He sent me a photo of the stitches, but of course you can't prove really what made those, the cut. I did check with a doctor who told me it was consistent with the tooth of a large animal. And he said at the hospital he told them a bear did it because he didn't want to say what it really was. But that's really about it in terms of personal injury. Not that I have every bit of information. Somebody else might have a report where they feel convinced it was real. But even so, it would still be in the minority of sightings. And it's interesting, most of the sightings, and in my mind, it's probably like 85 to 90%, don't really display anything supernatural, unless it would be that feeling of it sending the message that you can't get me, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, that kind of thing.
Right.
But walking on your hind legs is not a supernatural thing. Most, if not all, mammals can do it if they're motivated or trained to do that. Sometimes it's a limp paw. If you go into YouTube and put in upright walking bear, you can see a wild bear that was injured and ended up walking upright. So that's not supernatural. The ones that seem supernatural are the ones that appear in people's bedrooms and walk through windows, and you won't believe there are really quite a few of these reports. And they usually describe an animal that's taller than the usual ones, with jet black fur, and very often red eyes, and it's just suddenly appears in their bedroom. Or I've even had them appear in people's houses in daylight in the morning, in the hallway, not in the bedroom. Now these, are not natural flesh and blood animals. There's something else. There's something mimicking the form of the canine that we have on this earth, and maybe that's their original form, whatever they are. But most of the time people see them either just kind of walk through a door to go out or fade away. Some are terrorized out of their beds while they're sleeping. And again, this is something different. People tend to lump them all under, and I somewhat do too in my books, because they're upright, they look like canines, but we know they're not natural animals. The other ones that run in front of the car or stop and look at you, or they're carrying a lump of roadkill or eating something, are not doing anything supernatural. They may leave footprints. I've seen examples of this that either start or stop in the middle of a snowfield with no indication of how they got there or where they were going, but we didn't see what made them in that case. So that might have been something else. But there are several different types, and there are the large ones that look like maybe not as much as dire dogs. Dire dogs were not as large as people think. They were bigger than our present timber wolves, but not that much bigger. They had thicker jaws and could, really chomp down on things hard. But you go a little farther back to some of the forerunners that are extinct for a really long time, like 40 million years, and those things do get really huge and gruff looking. The dire dogs, we can look at those. They're like something like 10,000 of them buried in the tar pits in California, and we kind of know what they are. Well, people are seeing some kind of a creature that I've been calling them quads, just for lack of a better word, for years. I think I have a better one now and I've got a big chapter on this in my next book that will be coming out, because they have their own typical behavior that's different. They've got a bigger head. Sometimes the ruff around their neck and their back is so big, people will say it almost looks like it has a mane. Sometimes it's got a razorback ruff, but they're always hugely muscular, much thicker limbs. They're mostly on on all fours. Sometimes they'll get up on hind legs a little bit, but they're mostly on all fours. They love to chase vehicles and try and bam them off the road. And I've heard of 2 incidents now where the car was actually rolled over, and in one of them the animal appeared to be hurt, and when the person got around the car, it was gone. It had run off or something. So that's 3 right there, and I could go on. It can get confusing as to the various types. Those are the main difference ones. The ones that are obviously phantoms, the ones that are just too big, thick, and muscular and different to be the normal ones you see, which are generally the size of a large timber wolf and more graceful. These other ones, though, too, the large ones, have something else about them. People say it seemed like it was, noble, like it I didn't really count, but it just, then they can't explain why it was chasing the car. But they often also, here's another similarity, they often will always say, well, it was the size of a Shetland pony or a bull calf, or when it got up to my passenger side window, its shoulders were even with the passenger side window. The shoulders, not the top of the head.
Wow.
So it's something really big. And these show up all over the place, too. They're not limited to any one area.
Well, I was going to ask you real quick, too, just to touch back on the thing you were talking about with the creatures would appear to be jet black. I know that, and where they have the sort of disintegration element, of course, when I think of like things showing up in your bedroom and fading out, of course I think of like the alien abduction syndrome, but also the shadow creature or shadow man syndrome, which people sometimes attribute to aliens or something like that. It seems like there's so much, and I can see why you see that sort of crossing over into different elements of the paranormal, because certain things, and I don't know, again, like you said, maybe they're mimicking this or that, but it seems like they have similar modes of transportation and things like that, and similar modes of conduct, because it's like, obviously if something's in your room and it's studying you and you're asleep and helpless, if it was going to eat you, it probably would have. So right. I don't know if it's some sort of, they're trying to tell you something, if they're just there to study, if, who knows what. And that's what has always seemed, I think that puts people off and makes them so uneasy, because, again, humans, we really like to think we're the top of the food chain, and that's why I think a lot of people don't adhere to the belief in extraterrestrials and whatnot, because everybody's like, well, if they could have come here and talked to us, obviously they would have, and it's like, I mean, have you not looked at history? I think they're talking to us in our own way if they actually exist, but, I don't think the classic come land on the White House lawn thing is going to fly, because they know that they'd be blown out of the sky within 10 miles of the place.
Right. Either that, or there's the analogy that if you were going to study and conquer an anthill, would you go down and introduce yourself somehow to them in a way that they, how would an ant comprehend you telling them that you were going to study them and that you were going to tell them certain new secrets? And we were just so different that it's incomprehensible. Well, maybe it could be like that with us and things from other parts of the universe. Who knows? I'm certainly not the first person to make that comparison.
Well, let me ask you too, real quick. I'm sorry,
Sure.
I didn't mean to interrupt you again. I wanted to make sure to mention your website and where they can contact you and get your books, and also I want to talk a little bit about your upcoming book.
Sure. The best place to go, I have an author Facebook page. I also am on Twitter, but you can get all those from lindagodfrey.com. There's no W's, just lindagodfrey.com. It's a WordPress blog. You don't have to sign up for it. It's free. I don't have ads on it. But there is a place where you can get my email. If you have questions, there is a form that you can fill out to let me know your own sighting or experience. And there are other pages to it. There's a books and bio page where you can get a book list, and I like to keep a short list of fairly recent podcasts that you can listen to, that kind of thing. So hopefully it's just made to be, and most importantly, I put up sightings that don't fit in my books or haven't made it in the book for some reason, or that I think needs to just be put out right away. And you'll find several of those that aren't posted anywhere. And quite a few other things that have happened to me over the years. It's getting a pretty long archive now.
You know, it's so crazy that it's, you know, people don't think about, and again, we're going in what we call, you know, the human idea of what time is, that even in the short time that you've been doing this, that it does seem like these things have grown or developed other elements or metamorphosized into different type creatures. And does it seem like there's a certain hierarchy in this? Because, you know, like you have like the little grays in the alien world, then you have like the taller grays, and then you have like the Nordics and things like that. Does it seem like there are certain ones that do certain things, or certain ones that have a certain amount of intellect or psychic ability?
You know, it's really hard to say. I think you see that more with the Bigfoots than with the Dogmen. And I have to say, too, I started receiving Bigfoot, Sasquatch reports in the early 90s as soon as the other stories came out, because people somehow felt they were related. You know, and I found out we really had a very long and strong Bigfoot presence from at least the 1960s. I got really a surprising number of reports here in Walworth County in Wisconsin. And I think I attribute it to being partly occupied by the Kettle Moraine State Forest. We have southern and northern units. It's quite a large amount of land, and it's perfect for Bigfoots. It's just their complete ideal territory, because there are these deep crevasses left by the last iceberg that came through, and not iceberg, glacier is what I meant to say. And so you have that difference in elevations. There are all kinds of wildlife, turkey, deer, just you name it, plants that don't grow anywhere else. And people don't go down into these crevasses, or kettles as we call them, because they're kind of shaped like flat-sided kettles, right. Because they're brambles, and the soil is being, you know, carried by the glacier all those years. Is very pebbly and loose. I've skidded down to the bottom of one of those openings more than on the seat of my jeans more than once, you know, slipping and going down. So people don't generally go down in them. They walk on the ridges between them, and that's where any of the paths are. So there's tons of space in those parks, or two different park areas, that really isn't trod by humans. And I've had, and I used to live right on the southern edge of the Kettle Moraine, and I did have daylight, not very far away sightings of Bigfoot and some kind of amazing encounters. It all started in 2012. If you go to my blog, lindagodfrey.com, and type in the search box Bigfoot Branch, and that gives you my very first encounter that I had in that area.
Wow. Well, let me ask you something, because I know you have just a limited amount of time to talk. Now, you were talking about areas that are very desolate, overgrown, and makes me think, of course, places like in New Jersey with the Mothman, and you'd also reported on like flying creatures. I had spoken to David Domine from Louisville, Kentucky, or Louisville, however you want to pronounce it, and we had discussed, you know, they actually have something called, like they call it the gargoyle, and then I also know that obviously the Native American stories of the Thunderbird and things like that. what is the situation on like the flying creatures? Are they more reptilian, like a Mothman? Are they more like winged, like a giant eagle? Or what's the story on that?
Well, I did for my book, American Monsters. I did a lot of research on the flying things, and I discovered that whenever I went to the Native American descriptions of thunderbirds, they were actually feathered things, like giant raptors of some kind. But there were also these things that look like pterosaurs, from Jurassic Park, which are very different looking. They look exactly like the things we have fossils of, that were featherless as far as we know. So there are two different kinds of birds, but the thunderbirds usually refer to the things with feathers. And the other ones might have been some type of air spirit to the Native Americans. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that the flying things have differing descriptions. There were a couple of different descriptions of Mothman back in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And here in Wisconsin, I went and investigated an incident. I called it the man bat. At the time, it was a man and his son who had this flying thing soar directly at their windshield. They thought it was going to collide with their truck, and its wings were as or wider than the width of their truck. And at the last second, it went up straight up in the air and screeched, and they got sick from hearing that screech. That's what they equated it to. But we also have other records in Wisconsin of a couple of a truckload of highway workers and also a state deputy who saw a reptilian type of things. And it was two different cases, and in each case they saw it standing in the middle of Highway 13 up near Medford, and when they got close, it snapped wings out from its back and just took up straight through the trees, just like the man bat did. And the man bat was described to me as looking sort of like a canine, a wolf-like creature in the center of these gigantic bat-like wings. And of course, bats themselves have that sort of muzzle. They could be construed as being a little bit canine, but it was too big to be any bat that we know of. So these things tend to vary in appearance, and I just don't know that there's any one category to put them in other than that they all fly.
Well, something that you said that sort of triggered something in my head. You were talking about when the creature was coming toward the windshield and it emitted a certain frequency. Some people realize, if you've ever been to a concert, and you've been there and that bass is bumping in your chest and you kind of get almost like that going over the railroad tracks too fast, feeling in your stomach, that sort of lift. Exactly. And perhaps these things as a defense are as in uses in hunting, just like a bat would use sonics, to let you know when there's a moth or whatever. Maybe they have that in a way as of a warning, as of some sort of, not maybe so much an attack, but it was a beware, stay away from me.
Right. Yeah. It's really hard to say. The men were both terrified, and the younger one wouldn't even talk about it. So it's an amazing world. And yeah, I did a lot more research for American Monsters on the flying things than I had before, and was amazed really at what there is out there, what people are seeing, and the good things that stand behind them. And my latest book, you had asked me about this earlier, I didn't quite get to it, but it's called Monsters Among Us, and it kind of explores that liminal area between the dark side and the light side, and explores some of the stories that I might not have previously thought worthy of putting in a book, because they just seemed too sensational to me. And I started getting more and more of them, and I realized I was kind of self-censoring needlessly, and I really just needed to report these stories as they were. I put some fact-check charts on the ones that were available, whether there were UFOs around, what the sun flares were doing at that time, and the phase of the moon, so it helps lend a little bit of trackability to it. But it's a different tack from the other books that I think people will enjoy. And the one I've got going on right now, it'll be released sometime in the next year. I'm not sure exactly when. Could be like in a month. It could be. It just depends on the publisher. but it goes to some real far strange ends, and talks about those dire wolf-looking dogs and a couple other things that will surprise people.
I'm excited to hear it, and I know my audience is as well. And I definitely want to have you back on if you grant me that when your new book is out, and I'd love to check it out. I want to thank you for being on, because I know you got to cut out of here. As always, you've been very gracious, and I thank you so much. And again, go check out her site, go get her books, and if you can go to the conventions. I wish I could have went this year. We actually had just had our first grandbaby, so I wasn't able to really get out and do a whole lot, which is fine. I'll take a grandbaby. It is a good, very good excuse. It's better than the dogman ate my homework or something. But
definitely.
But anyway, Linda, I want to thank you for being on, and
you're welcome.
And I will be right back with the audience in just one quick second. Hey guys, welcome back. As you are listening to This Is House of Asher, you're listening to episode 52. We had to cut it a little short. Ms. Godfrey had a previous engagement, and I'm very thankful for the time she was able to give us. She's a real sweetheart and a very earnest reporter. And again, I love the fact that she's very approachable. She doesn't try to, turn it over, sensationalize it to overly Hollywood, what she does, which I think that comes from the stern disciplinary world of journalism, especially back in the day when you really had to be on top of your stuff. I was going to talk to you guys real quick about a few things, because usually I don't always have time to do this because I'm so caught up. I'm a fan. Everybody I have on this show, I'm very much a fan of, and love having these guys on, and I'm sort of along for the ride. And so I'm constantly like spitting out, oh yeah, what about this? What about that? That's just my nature, guys. It's just that's how I talk to my friends. That's how I talk to these folks. I consider them my friends. I was going to discuss a few things. If you haven't been to steveasher.com, this is all lowercase and together, please check it out. You can go on there and join our mailing list. You can go on there and find out about different things, different events. You can also go on there and find out about my last books and my latest books. My last two books was The Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary, and that's available through Amazon, Simon & Schuster, Books A Million, Lord, Walmart, Target, pretty much anywhere they sell books, any reputable bookstore, you can get it. It's also available in ebook formats, and I believe some of those will read it to you. So I'm hoping one day to actually get it in like an audiobook form. I'm not going to lie, I love audiobooks. Love audiobooks. It's great if you're driving back and forth or doing whatever. A lot of times I listen to audiobooks if I'm doing stuff here at the house, cooking dinner, whatever, doing stuff with the kids, and it kind of helps me multitask and get different stuff done. And it's just when are you going to go wrong learning about a new subject or hearing about this and that, and getting your work done? You can't beat it. So anyway, but the second book is The Hauntings of the Western Lunatic Asylum. It's book 2 of the Haunting series, and I am hard at work on book 3, which is going to be about a Catholic compound, orphanage, church, priory, all this stuff in Morganfield, Kentucky. And as of now, it is called The Hauntings of the St. Vincent Academy. This will, the reason I mention this today is that it does tie in with a Bigfoot sighting. Pretty crazy, kind of violent Bigfoot sighting that happened some years back. Of course, I changed names and certain elements of the location to protect people's anonymity. The person that I got this from, was very, very, like most people, very hesitant and very guarded, because especially in a smaller area, you can get kind of judged if you are seeing odd things out in the woods and whatever. But I think you guys really like it. And if for those who do not know, the 4th, which I plan on putting out either as part of the end part of the trilogy, which I know 4 books doesn't make a trilogy. A quadrilogy? Yeah, I suck at that. But it's going to be a follow-up to the penitentiary, and it's going to be a revisiting of the old facility at the Kentucky State Penitentiary, and touching on some stories that, honestly, I just didn't have fleshed out. Different stories that I needed more elements brought to it, more details, more facts, because I hate to bring anything to you guys that doesn't have legs, there's no point in that. But that's what's going on with the writing. And I do want you guys to, I don't know if you're hearing this on Spreaker, on the Spreaker app. I don't know if you're hearing this on YouTube. If so, I'm assuming you're listening to this on Conflict Radio. These guys are carrying stuff now exclusively on YouTube. Real laid back folks, got lots of great shows, a lot of great interviewers, and just a whole lot of different subjects covering, good Lord, everything, anything that touches on the paranormal, to ends of scientific discoveries, to metaphysics, to whatever. Just good all around campfire spook stories. Conflict Radio, check it out, and check out their site online. I am in the processes of setting up hopefully a few more terrestrial stations. As you know, this is, at least at the time of making this recording, I am played on WPKY. That's 103.3 FM out of Princeton, Kentucky, your hometown radio station and home of the Tiger. I always like to put that little tagline. They appreciate it. Good folks, and they're sweet enough and kind enough and open-minded enough to allow me to get on there and bring you these different quirky stories and strange historical events and things like that. Because a lot of people in this area talking about, Dogmen and Bigfoot and all that, there's a growing amount of people who will openly talk about it. Everybody has, well, yeah, I don't believe in those sort of things, but I had an uncle, Uncle Jake or my Aunt Essie, they were out at LBL and they were doing this and that and whatever, and then this big thing walked across the edge of the beach, across the other side of the water, or maybe threw rocks into the water trying to scare them off. That's pretty common, and people tend to forget this, especially if you're out of the region, because most people that's heard the Mothman stories for the first time is going, man, why are these guys smoking? But you have to be there. And more than that, even if you weren't there, you have to talk to these people. And you have to hear the sincerity in the voice, the look in their eyes, their body posture. And, short of them having some sort of delusional moment, which you have to vet the people as well. But you can generally tell when these people have felt they've truly went through something uncanny and beyond the norm. And that's what the show's about. I try to make sure to bring you things that can be a little scary, but also have a little humor in it, and it's always going to have a bit of a southern flavor to it. That's just, y'all just going to have to roll with that. That's just my nature. But I'm going to take the time to ask, too, if you guys have guests that you want to see. If you guys have subjects that maybe I haven't touched on, or maybe something I touched on, and it's like, well, that was really cool about the story you had about, serial killers. I want to hear more about that, which I'm in the processes of setting up some more shows, so you guys should really enjoy that. Or maybe there's like, well, hey, you don't ever talk about this and that. You don't talk about whatever, this base in Kentucky supposedly that had aliens there, or this place over here that had whatever, or this certain type of people that live in this region of whatever. And it doesn't have to be just about Kentucky, obviously, because we bounce all over. I do try to keep stuff rooted here in the bluegrass because that's what I know, and that's where my heart is and most of my knowledge is primarily. But of course, researching, you're going to cross-reference things that will take you to Indonesia, that will take you to the Ukraine, things that will take you to, Australia. As we were talking about the Yowie and things like that, which is also another type of supposed cryptid. And I've been so blessed that you guys have allowed me to do this. And I know I'm not trying to sound contrite. I really mean that, because I love talking about this stuff. I'm a geek for it. I'm an old school monster kid. I love things about the paranormal. I love things about nature, because honestly, a lot of what we think is paranormal is just probably part of nature we're just not aware of yet. Our human growth isn't at the point now where we've gotten it. But that's the beauty of knowledge. To me, it's like watching a little child grow, and they discover these little things. And sometimes something that you experience or that you learn from, they also learn that, but they have a different take on it. So you too learn through watching through their eyes. And that's what's great, is that all the guests that I've had on, Miss Godfrey, Mr. Phillips, Mrs. Ballard, all these different people, Mr. Moorhead, all these folks have been kind enough to actually take time out for our little show to come in and, as I would say, break bread with us and just have a little sit down. And that's the beauty of this, that you don't always find that in entertainment. You don't always find that, my God, and in your own neighborhood. We've gotten sometimes to the point, and I'm not going to preach, I promise I won't, but we've kind of gotten to that point where, we're so into our electronics, or we're so into this or that people don't take time up to look at the sky, that people don't take time to talk to their neighbors. And that's what I kind of feel like this is. It's sort of like me and these different guests sitting on a little wraparound back porch in some wicker chairs, sipping on some tea and having a good talk. And that's something I found, in my experience with these folks, to be very blessed, and that these guys are open, and that they're willing to do that, because not everybody has to be. And you're always going to encounter some folks that just aren't. And, unless you have, 8 billion listenership or something like that, they're just, and it's not because they're being mean, it's just they're obviously trying to reach maximum exposure. But you overwhelmingly find folks that's like, I like what you're doing. You're very honest with your stuff. You're not trying to pump it up, oversell it, and I'm so proud of that. I will tell you real quick before I go. In my first book, Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary, there was a story, and there was an area called Vinegar Hill. Vinegar Hill is up behind the state penitentiary, and it is where the indigent inmates go, or the families didn't want them. Basically, it was the unwanted or the unclaimed. And this is in the days when, they just didn't have the sort of means to maybe do something else with the body. I mean, I'm sure I'm imagining some of them maybe went to medical clinics and stuff, but maybe not for research or whatnot. But these folks were buried in this area called Vinegar Hill, up around the P Ridge area. Anybody in this area is sort of familiar with it. If you come in the road to the penitentiary, as you get through some of the first curves and it opens up, you can look down. There's a big drop off. There's a building where they do target practice, and you can actually see the targets and the sand mounds and all that to catch the stray bullets and whatnot in behind it. If you look in behind that, there's a real dense thicket of woods, and if a person were to, and I'm not saying to do this because it's a state property, so don't walk up there. Do not walk up there. But if a person was to walk in that area a little ways back, you will find sort of a depression, an area where there's stones. And one of the last wardens had actually, I don't know if he rededicated the ground or what, but there is actually a proper stone announcing that these men are buried there. And there was a kid who was visiting some family from around Murray, Kentucky, and they were coming down to hang out on the lake. This is a very popular area for that. And this guy did parkour, and parkour is, they do a lot of urban running, and they'll come to like a half wall, like a 5 or 6 foot wall, maybe a little lower, and kind of jump over it and just keep running, and or to run up the wall and run across the ledges of low buildings and stuff. Sounds crazy. I don't want to do it, but anyway, they would do it. Well, this kid come in, and he was exploring just areas around Lyon County. Well, as the night went on, they're sitting there and they're having probably barbecue or whatever, and they're talking, probably having a beer, and they're like, really like to go check out some of these woods. Well, so here comes stories about the woods, and well, the young guy's uncle was there with his cousin, and they were talking about, well, you don't want to go up around Vinegar Hill because that's where it's a real old part of the woods, and creepy stuff is up there. You don't want to play up there. So anyway, as young men do, some young women, but being a young guy, I know this to be a fact. They're like, yeah, we need to go check this out. So early that next morning, they had everything ready. They loaded up in their little, probably like I don't know what it was, some little F-100 or F-150 or whatever. So they go scooting back and around in sort of a back way in that the uncle told him about that meets the property with the penitentiary. And again, don't do this for many reasons. But they go to this area and they follow it out. It gets so deep they can't get any deeper, so they have to start footing it. So they're going and they're winding around these hills, and it's still dark. They're out there with dim like flashlights low to the ground, because of course they're going to be flashing around and attract attention because they're not really supposed to be there. So they're going out in here and they keep hearing this stuff in the background, trees popping and clicking. And say, well, it's we'd had a real bad ice storm. It was around that area not long after that, and so it's probably just some of the old trees, winds blowing them, they're cracking. Well, they kept hearing almost like knocks, clacking sounds. Well, this is making them kind of uncomfortable. It's like, look, man, we need to find this. It's still not even daylight out. So anyway, they're going in. They finally start getting into what seems sort of somewhat of a path, like a walked, beaten path. Well, by this time, they're hearing guttural sounds, growls, things like that, and pretty close. Probably no more than initially a couple hundred feet. Well, pretty soon they're getting into thicker stuff, so they're really kind of slowing down, and they're trying to move up this hill. Now, by this time, whatever was 100 and something feet behind them is now probably no more than 50 feet, and they're starting to hear really close movement, and occasionally see like darting something behind trees. They don't know if there's a couple things out there. They don't know if there's one thing out there, but whatever it is sounds big and peed off. So these boys are kind of beside themselves. They didn't really bring nothing in regards of weapons and stuff, because they're going onto a state property. You're not supposed to have weapons on state property. So they're booking it up this hill, scratching, trying to get up the top of this hill. And whatever it is just right there on them. And they're getting caught up in brambles. They're getting caught up in thorn bushes. They're getting caught up. It's just like they could not have found a worse path to try to get up and away from this thing, And at this point, the cousin who's the parkour guy is just boogieing. He's just like, let's go. Now the other guy who's more local, he's still flashing his light. He's running, and he's like, man, what is that? And so the other guy's like, I don't care what it is. I want to get to the top of this hill. Maybe we can find the quickest way out of here. At this point, he's not even worried about going to the old inmate cemetery up on Vinegar Hill. Well, they're pushing, they're climbing, catching their backpacks. Half their stuff's getting knocked down. They're losing flashlights. At this point, they're basically going on what dim pre-dawn light is coming across the tops of the trees. And there's very little. This is a very dense area of woods. And they're pushing, and they're climbing, they're crawling, they're getting scraped up. They're dirty. And they're almost to the top of the hill. And at this point, the flashlight that they still have, the only one that they still have on hand, they flash, and they see something, and it's big. This isn't like a coyote. This is not a wild dog. This is a frickin' wild animal, and it's huge. And so they are running. They just go into full run. They run over the top of the hill. They fall. They roll down the hill, and whatever this creature is mounts to the top of the hill. You can see this thing was very wide. The hackles on the back of its neck's up, and it looks like a giant, just like a giant wolf type dog hybrid, baying at him with these big bright red eyes. And for whatever reason, it wouldn't come down. And it's pacing, and it's almost got like a steam coming off of it. Well, they're thinking that we got to do something. This thing's going to kill us. So they start reaching around. They start finding what these small hand-sized stones. Well, about the time they're getting ready to throw it at it, this animal starts screaming because the rays of sunlight come through, hits its back, it dissipates. Come to find out, they fell into the graveyard. And for whatever reason, it wouldn't pass hollowed ground. So that's the end of that episode, folks. I hope you're well. take care. I will see you for the next episode, and hopefully you will be here to enjoy it and enjoy some more weird stuff. But enjoy the rest of the day, and as the shadows grow long, check your bed, check your closets. There may be a dogman or God knows what in there. But until next time, love yourselves, love one another, and don't be afraid to stay scared. Take care, everybody.